Hello, people. This is Donald Kent, American Zarathustra. I am going to do a response video to a piece that was shown to me by Josh Neal, this gentleman on YouTube, goes by Paul Talk here on YouTube, did a response to my article at the White People's Quarterly. I basically am going to play his video and pause it and respond to it. So I believe he saw my video over at No Apologies. I'm actually appearing soon, going over some other information. There's a snippet from my interview with Josh Neal. But the piece here is Donald Kent on principles of art. Oh, no, that's another snippet from our larger interview. Anyway, it's in here. Let's see if we can go to videos and just locate which one I am referring to. Boy, Josh is prolific. I love his channel. If you don't know Josh's channel, you gotta get on there. So Against Post-Modernism with Donald Kent. So that's the one. Anyway, let's go back over here to Paul's channel. And like I said, we're just going to listen to his critique of my article and his discussion on art, and then just respond with that.
I'm going to talk about somebody named Donald Kent, who did a long video with No Apologies, and then No Apologies just put an excerpt of that on his channel. I'll try to link it. I'll link also another excerpt from this other stream that Donald Kent did, in which he plays a rock song that he wrote. And he also reads a poem. And I'm going to quote the first 3 lines of this poem. Born too late to build the ancient empire. Born too soon to colonize heavenly space. Born just in time to kindle the fading fire. Now, Donald Kent, what's his name? I'm not getting it. Donald Kent. He's an artist, and he apparently, I guess he's a comic book artist. I've just only glimpsed what he does. He seems highly competent, and he writes rock music, and he writes poetry, and so he's and the poem goes on. It's sort of a white nationalist thing. I am in very, very deep sympathy with this. I it's not that I disagree with the white nationalist thing. I don't think that's going to. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I don't think it's. I don't think it's the right way. But I'm in deep sympathy with it, and I'm in particularly deep sympathy with Donald Kent. And here's this young artist, and he comes into this world, and he wants to do something normal and good. Salut Laura. Voilà, très bien. Très bien. What was I saying? So here, the young artists today, those rare young artists who want to do something normal. Well, that was me. And that was me at a time when there was no white nationalism at all, and when this thing was just taking off, and when there was no internet, and I was very isolated. But so that was a disadvantage. The isolation was a disadvantage, but there was an advantage. There were more traces of the old thing around. There were older guys I could go to there was still a little bit of normalcy in the world. And today, total chaos. And this art world has become totally bloated. It was bloating when I was a kid. And when I was a kid, if you know New York, you know Chelsea, Tribeca, Canal Street, Soho. Well, that didn't exist when I was a kid. It was Madison Avenue. 57th Street. 57th Street didn't exist. I mean, these were...
I'm going to jump in real fast here. I did not go into any detail about the time that I lived in New York City after I finished my fine art degree. I'm a young man, around 23 years oldish, and I moved to New York City to, quote, become an artist. And I learned over the next couple of years the painful truth of the art world, if the so-called art world. And it's interesting because it seems that he has some history and experience with those things as well. So he's actually backing up some of my points now regarding how the art world has been hijacked, or in some sense is not for us white people specifically.
But these are the gallery areas in New York that came up. First 57th Street, then Soho, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it just keeps expanding. And the Madison Avenue galleries are still there. But it was on Madison Avenue where all the pop art was and so on, which I saw as a kid.
Okay, quick jump in. Talked about seeing pop art as a kid. Who's the biggest name in pop art but Andy Warhol? And so in my interview with Josh Neal on No Apologies, I go on to talk about Andy Warhol as the Antichrist of art, and how, in a sense, abstract expressionism was the end of art, so to speak. Not really, but within that lineage of thinking. And then right after that, right away, you get pop art, you get Andy Warhol, you get this vapid, empty shell of an imitation of art that's run by gays and feminists.
So I'm in deep sympathy with a guy like Donald Kent, and I'm in, what I'm saying is I'm gonna critique what he says in this thing, because it's not like it's all wrong, and it comes from he's doing what he's got to do, and he's right to do it, and he's struggling. But in my opinion, it's not. That analysis has got to evolve if it's going to be effective. It's not the right analysis.
All right, I hear you. Now, what is the right analysis? So that's kind of my shout out to my buddy here, that my new friend here, that please go into some detail. So we have actually chatted just a little bit on YouTube, and I'm asking him, please give me more. I want more details on this. So, and I'm, just super excited to dive right in. I don't look at this like some kind of a squabble or internet fight or some dumb thing like that. I mean, that's great marketing, but anyway, no, I'm really, really excited to engage people of high intelligence and this gentleman is an amazing artist. So, I would love to go into this in detail.
And the differences are subtle. So let me try to talk about this. The first thing he says in this extract that Josh put up, no apologies, is he defines art as creation of cultural objects that convey meaning, feeling, and parable according to aesthetic structure. Right. Now, here's the thing. A statement like that, of course, it's a very general statement, but it's so full of I mean, it's a kind of shorthand thing. It's so full of this Heideggerian mindset. It's like one could invent some kind of metaphor, but it's like it's just this wrong. It's struggling. It's like you've got a rocket. There's the rocket. It's there. But you don't have the right fuel. So, you put milk in there, you put vinegar in there. I mean, it's not going to go anywhere. And this education that people have gotten, it's like, what I said in a recent video about, I hope there's not too much wind noise, but I don't really care because I like sitting out here so much that, I'm just making these videos, I want to help people, but.
Okay, so it's a little rough to try to follow, and I'm anxious to get to the point here. Let me respond a little bit. I believe what he means by the Heideggerian mindset, and I'll need him to confirm this, or somebody to, is the concept of the reality of art and the theory of art. And how, what I gave was a very kind of dictionary definition. And within the context of the article, and also being an art teacher, this is my instinct, is to not talk exclusively to the artist or the artists and in the art world per se, but to talk to people outside of the art world. We already know our vernacular. We already know our definitions, our history, etc. I'm trying to open up the curtains here and shine a light in. So I think you need to have very, very simple definitions like this. My impression of, I believe his name's Paul's critique of me is more from an artist's perspective. And that's clearly valid, and actually I find it very enjoyable and engaging. But I'm still kind of clamoring a little bit, and sometimes the style of like taking a break and going off on tangents or whatever is it's rough it's tough to get the idea across here. So let's see what happens.
Not so much that I want to sit inside and do this. So it's like this business of being against global homo, and then coming up with this idea that Christianity is going to be this worldwide religion where everybody's going to be nice, or this great.
I never said that. I have no idea where that came from. That there's nothing in. You'll have to quote me exactly where I said that, because I guarantee you that is not part of what I said. And that's not a for or against comment about Christianity, but it never came into the discussion of my art critique. So I'm a little thrown off by that. So let's just keep going.
Vast area where everybody's going to be a Christian and everybody's going to be nice, because we're beyond the law, and it's a mirror of, I'm not explaining it so well, but understand it yourself. It's a mirror of the SJW thing. Everybody's going to be nice. We're going to have this great era where everything's going to be nice, and the bad thing will be excluded. And it comes out of this constant drumbeat of slavery and the Palestinians and on and on and on, and which is all wrong. It's all wrong. There's nuggets of truth. Feminism, the whole thing's wrong. Women were always powerful. The slavery is not all about white people repressing black people. There's some of that. There's some of it, but it's way more complicated.
I'm a little bit lost here. Those are other subjects, and so I'm not quite sure how that connects to my art, or rather my article. If there's this implication that maybe I'm beating an old drum, so to speak, of like what is taught in colleges about art, I would beg to differ, only in that I'm completely against Post-Modernism. My theory and my statement in the article is essentially that postmodernism is essentially a weapon to destroy Western art from within, to disenfranchise, or rather to alienate whites from their own culture. That topic right there is debatable, and I would definitely engage in some discussion on that. However, I am the farthest thing from an SJW.
So, all right. So this statement, creation of cultural objects. Well, first of all, the idea of culture, that's already a problem. Thinking in terms of culture. Our culture, their culture, the white culture. No. I mean, what? Hokusai isn't part of painting?
I gotta jump in. Okay, so and I feel as if he knows what he means, and he's just not able to kind of get it out or get it across. Hokusai is a Japanese printmaker. Most of us know him for the wave, the famous. Some Japanese people in a boat on a huge wave. Beautiful work. I don't see how that's not a cultural object, though. And I think that I think it's challenging or interesting to take the discussion of art outside of the cultural realm. That's intriguing. How would we do that? That's quite a fascinating concept. I think the way to do that is to speak strictly from the subjective view of the artist. So strictly from the objective view of the creator. Looking at some of the other people I know and I follow on Twitter that are in the White Art Collective and or published on the White People's Quarterly, we're a group of people that are perhaps the core of this fledgling movement that, we're making white conscious art. And that's challenging and hard in the sense of how do you pay honor to this concept without being kind of cheesy or hackneyed or false, or it's hard. It's quite hard to do. But no, maybe I guess I'm going off on a tangent here, but I'm just sort of experimenting with the idea that, artists, I don't sit around saying I am a white male from America, and therefore I am about to make white male American art. It just exudes naturally out of you because you are of the culture. So I really have to. I'm just a bit confused about what's the problem with looking at defining art as a cultural artifact.
It's sure there are different cultures, but you could say that cultures are like different colored glasses through which we look at reality. So somebody has, say,
I do like that idea, and I've many people know I've studied Buddhism and Taoism for 20 years, and the concept of what is real and what is identity, it's an enormous topic, and certainly a subject for another show or something. However, culture is it is the lens through which we see things and experience things. So, it's both true and false, right? I mean, if you're just to look at the tree behind him and say, what is a tree? Well, it's wood, and well, it's water, and it's leaves, and it's air, and it's earth, and can you take it outside of its environment? Will it still be a tree? If you chop it into pieces, will it still be a tree? There's all these epistemological and philosophical questions about truth. And so I think this is kind of the angle that I think Paul is coming from.
The Japanese glasses, they're a little pink. So things are a little pink, but there they are. And then, maybe the Western glasses are clear glass, maybe. But even if you're doing something looking through pink glasses, you're dealing with reality. So you get a great artist like Hokusai. Culture. Culture used to mean great art. That's what it meant. It didn't mean our culture, like fast food culture. I mean, this is a completely newfangled thing. That usage did not exist when I was a kid. I mean, intellectuals were already saying things like that and thinking things like that. When I was a kid, that usage did not exist.
So just for whatever reason, it's important to say that we're talking about word usage now and definitions. To be cultured versus the just plain old the word culture are different ways to use the word. Like if you were cultured in the old days, that meant maybe you spoke Latin, or you're very well read in literature, or you went to see the opera, this kind of thing. So I feel as if there's a disconnect here between him analyzing what I'm saying and his own ideas.
Culture meant art. And you were cultivated or you weren't cultivated. That was the extent of it. There weren't these cultures. Youth culture. How about youth fads? Fads. I mean, that's what these cultural things are. They're fads. I mean, even if you go to, say, China or wherever, and they wear these costumes, they've been wearing them for 1,000 years and so on. It's still a fad. It's still fashion. A way of doing things. Like you go to Oklahoma and they have a way of talking. It's just a way. It's not a culture. No, but for Heidegger, the culture is something. You draw your being from it. I mean, it's very serious. You draw, and it's a powerful idea. It's an idea that's partly true. And I've explained this an awful lot. I'll explain it again. In a nutshell, the idea is you have to have a way of perceiving things. It's like if you can't see the difference between dark and light, basically you're blind. I mean, maybe you can see something, but what are you going to see? A blur, an even blur. So you've got to be able to distinguish between light things and dark things, at least, even if you're colorblind. Then you can start to see. Then if you can perceive space, because we can triangulate with our two eyes, you can perceive space. But let's say you couldn't triangulate. Let's say you only had one eye, and you didn't have the right kind of training. People who are blind from birth, and then years and years later, their blindness is cured, very often, they just can't figure it out. And they just close their eyes and go back to being blind because they were getting around okay that way. So that's the idea. Our values. The difference between good and evil. Our culture gives us the difference between good and evil, and that allows us to have a moral sense. Without the culture, we have no moral sense. We're just like savages. We're like people who can't see the difference between dark and light. This is ridiculous. I mean, again, there's truth in it. You have to. I mean, these things are written in our heart, but we also have to learn them. It's the angel and the beast kind of thing. So this idea of a cultural object is fundamentally wrong. You're making art.
This is just a kind of a key point because we went sort of off into space and came back. It's important to understand, and I think his exposition on Heidegger is interesting. But I'm still not feeling the idea that there's no such thing as a cultural object. Let's see where he goes from here.
You're making something, and art is something that's beautiful. First of all, art is about beauty.
I do agree with that. I don't think it's limited to that. So we'll see. Maybe we're going to start actually tuning in on our differences here.
Theology, philosophy, that's about truth. Art is not about truth. It's about beauty. It's about truth insofar as beauty is truth. And that's an old idea in Western.
Okay, so art is not about truth. This is a fun challenge right there. I should maybe
culture
not get a terrible picture of him on screen. So I guess I'm gonna disagree with that. Art is about truth, but the question is not, is art about truth? The question is, what is truth? What is true? Especially since we're coming out of this discussion of identity and perception. How do we know what is real? These kinds of questions. It's I believe fair to say that everyone has their own truth. One of the he was referring to me writing rock songs, and the song that I played, or that was played on White Art Collective was a song called My Truth. So interestingly, right, it all kind of circles back together here. Now, that song, I explained that, I was so sick of people treating me as if my needs and my reality is delegitimized, that it's not legitimate in some way. And so I have to kind of go along with things and pretend like people are listening. And it's this exquisitely painful existential experience whereby you live in a world where every day the media is canceling you out and celebrating your extinction. I just can't tell you how acute that pain is. And so, making art to describe that truth of my experience is, there's truth in that, right? And that's what that's about. Art is extremely nebulous and vast. And so one can't, the word art is one of the biggest umbrella terms you could probably create. So there's room for misunderstanding and room for discussion and room for perhaps disagreement.
Let's say civilization, Western society, Western civilization is this old idea that truth, beauty, and goodness all go together. I'm trying to stay a little bit in the ASMR mode because otherwise I'll get apoplexy. So that's the first problem. So it's a cultural object that conveys meaning, feeling, and parable. So in other words, the thing, this object, what's it made? It's made, it conveys these things according to aesthetic structure. So it's there's this structure. You got to build the structure. And it's for conveying a meaning or a feeling or a story. No, that isn't, it's not like, say, paintings don't convey meanings. And a comic book, comic book is a story. But it's also graphic. Now, what is the meaning of the art of Winsor McCay? I mean, you could tell.
Okay, before we go off on another journey, let's pull it back a bit. Okay, let's say we're going to Antarctica. Okay, so would you like to just go and land on the shore and kind of explore and figure it out? Or maybe would you like a map? Is there such a map? Maybe we'll switch it to Iceland or someplace, or Greenland. There could be some, uncharted territory that is very vast, a lot of mystery within it, a lot of different topographic layouts, and you might have volcanoes and caves and wild beasts. Who knows what's there? So we start off with a map, you see. And so this is pretty much what I'm doing by giving this sort of dictionary definition of art conveys meaning, feeling, parable. I guess where I could self-critique here is that is maybe more exclusive to high IQ civilizations and maybe not so much to others. And I'm not trying to be snobby or stupid about that per se, because, I'm not an expert on, say, West African art. I'm not an expert on Indonesian art or Balinesian art, or, we could go on and on. And then, art forms from other civilizations that are long dead. How do we really know? So it's in many ways fair to say that these are generally true terms and a very solid basis from which to approach art. To flat out say, no, it's wrong, I think is just too grandiose. I think you could say, maybe you kind of break it down into other pieces or expand on, okay, from there over, if we move towards this understanding, you can see that that's not true, or that it's relatively true.
Tell the stories. The princess wants to play with little Nemo. But then there's all this crazy art. It's crazy art. What does it mean? Well, it's surreal. It expresses a dream world, but it's more than that. I mean, it's this thing, a harriman, crazy cat. all right, there's a story to it, but then there's just the art. And I'm gonna try to say what I mean.
This is interesting because I do actually experience this frustration. It's hard to explain, but when you're in the arts so long and you're an artist, then you have to walk through all these paths and kind of figure it all out. But again, I feel as if the artist talking about art versus the art educator talking about art, that's really the difference that I'm seeing between him and myself right now.
Let's say you paint a portrait. The meaning of the portrait is that it shows the person. Then you have a portrait painted by a hack, and then you have a portrait painted by a great painter, Delacroix, David, whatever. What's the difference? It's not because it's got a greater meaning or a greater feeling or it's a greater parable. It's a greater painting. What's that pointing to? Now, Donald Kent, elsewhere, he talks about the language of art.
Maybe we better stop right there. Okay, so 3 people paint a portrait. Okay, a hack, an average painter, and a great established artist. What's different between these 3 paintings? I think this points back to his comment about beauty and aesthetics. And I feel that I don't disagree at all that has its own, oh boy, what do I call it? Like, it's kind of an overarching truth. It's certainly a very essential part of art. No question. I guess where I'm going with that though, and I definitely lean towards, aesthetics and not towards the hack, and that kind of thing. But I would jump in as well and say, there is a story to it. It's the story of that person's life. I talked about meaning and parable. All these things are tied together. They're not in little separate units or something. They're all connected. So, I'm a portrait artist. I draw portraits all the time. I both fine art, quality, and caricature, and it has extraordinary value and meaning to the people who purchase them. You see, or sometimes I'll give them away, and so once again, they're telling a story. So even in the sense of drawing a little kid as a superhero, then that has meaning and it's telling a story. The story could be something in the future that he's kind of seeing himself as in the future. I did some portraits of Native American friends, and I'm really, really trying to pull out their ancestors in these portraits. And, granted, there's a level of like, okay, well, that's kind of hoop-de-doo. That's just you talking about the art. Does the art do that itself without me explaining it? That's extremely important. But that comes back to my theories on critiquing art. So understanding the context of a work of art. So we're getting into some really complex machinations here, but I'm just responding to what he's saying.
Well, yes, okay. But that's as if the language of art is in order to say something. That's not it. Art is a language. And, okay, there might be meanings, there might be feelings, there might be all these things, but the language is let's say you're painting. You're speaking the language of painting. If you can say it, I did a video with Charles Wright the other day. I made this point. Something my father says. People ask, "What's the meaning of your painting?" And he would say, "If I could say it, I wouldn't make a painting." In other words, there's something about each art that's expressed in the art and in no other way. Now, I'll give an example.
This is good. However, I don't see how it contradicts anything that I've said. So this, to me, points out, that's why I'm believing that this is kind of art from the artist's perspective rather than art from an art educator's perspective, whereby I'm trying to make art more understandable and more accessible to the common people. That's my mission. And I would love it if more people could do that because, and going back to my central thesis, postmodernism has robbed us or alienated us or shut us out, banished us from our own culture. This is extremely vital to the health of Western civilization. And I don't see enough people talking about it. Granted, there's not a lot of artists out there in our movement. And so, I'm just trying to grab the mantle here and do something with it. So I'm not sure I'm the best person to do it with, but I really want to engage people. When I hear people say, "Oh yeah, I was at the local museum and I'm never going back there." Oh, why? Well, I could have done that. Or, a monkey could have done that or something of that, yeah, well, okay, fine. I mean, that's postmodernism, but, there's this great long history of Western art and not even Western art. I mean, why can't we enjoy all cultures? There's no bias there, but specifically regarding our culture, our history, because of that one sour experience, you're going to walk away from it all. Anyway, let's move on.
So there's this idea: creation of a cultural object that conveys meaning, feeling, and parable according to aesthetic structure. That is the contemporary. I mean, contemporary artists, bad contemporary, kooky,
postmodern,
the kook stuff that people do today. They wouldn't disagree with that.
Okay, where we're heading right now is what he wants to say is conceptual art. It's I don't know how to say this, an aspect of postmodernism. The idea, I'll give you an example. When I went back to college to get a teaching degree, I was out of school for a while. I lived in Asia for 5 years. And, here I am in an art ed program, the only male, I'm older, and you have all these kind of feminists around me. And we start discussing art, and they kind of turn to me and say, didn't you get the memo? Like, you're over. The patriarchy is over. This, learning how to draw, having skills, aesthetics, those things are patriarchal. They oppress other people because they make us have to learn, have to struggle and work for years at a time to get the skills to do this work. It's all conceptual now. And so that's definitely, there's something sound and solid and good about conceptualism per se, or to an extent, but I don't believe to the extent that it sacrifices all other aspects of art. All art has some level of concept to it or conceptualism to it, but to strip away everything and to be anti-aesthetic, which is what postmodernism is, that's shite. Okay. That's no good. And what I'm noticing here in Paul's analysis is that he seems to think that I'm coming from that postmodern conceptualist school of thought, which is gravely wrong, but fair enough. Let's just keep going and see what happens.
They're good with that. That works for them. They're creating cultural objects. Now, what did Poussin say? Poussin didn't talk about art. He talked about painting. Painting is an art. And Poussin defines art. He defines painting. He defines painting. Pictures of everything under the sun, made with lines and colors. And the object of it is delectation. This is a whole different thing. The object, it's not a cultural object. It's a picture of everything, anything under the sun. In other words, anything we can see. Because if it's not under the sun, it's in the dark and we can't see it.
Quick jump in. How can it not be a cultural object if it's made by Poussin? It's like, he is a person from a culture in a cultural zone in a certain time of that culture's history. Yes, I do get where we're going with this. This is a far, far broader mentality or definition, in the sense that, as define painting here, not art specifically, but painting, the idea of basically representing the world. Okay, so fair enough. Fine. I mean, you can look at ancient Navajo cave paintings of that kind, or there's lines and shapes and colors, representing the world. I feel that is too vague, I guess. Vague isn't the word. Obtuse. It's too obtuse. It's too general, and it lacks definition and form. But my understanding of what I'm hearing Paul say is that I feel this leads to support his idea of art as aesthetics.
And what's under the sun is everything that exists. So, trees, people, buildings, whatever, cars. And how is it made? It's made with lines and colors. And what's it for? Delectation. If you don't know that word, it means, it's like the word delicious. It means savoring the deliciousness. And you take all of Poussin's paintings, they have meanings. Like he painted the people suffering from the ravages of the pest, or the ravages of war.
Okay, a little bit of a contradiction here, because earlier he was saying that art is not about meaning and story, and now he's proving my point by saying that. We'll just keep going.
Painted people happily in an Arcadian landscape, or Poussin's paintings are all full of meaning, but he never said, I'm trying to express a meaning. He never said, to produce a work of knowledge, like Donald Kent says. And, that it provides cognitive exploration and understanding. I mean, okay, you can look at a Poussin and it provides cognitive exploration and understanding at one level, at a kind of literary level. But at the basic level, it provides delectation.
I think the eagle has landed here. So he himself has just said at one level. So he's moving away from the kind of, once again, academic approach that I'm taking to describing art, and taking it into the artistic experience where you make art. So earlier he said, Poussin didn't say that I made these to tell stories. An artist doesn't have to say that they're doing that. It's just inherent in what they're doing. And I mean, I suppose that, that would be interesting to try to make art that does not tell a story, or in some sense, right? I mean, that's kind of a weird thing, and to some extent, but to make an object of art strictly for aesthetics is completely justified. I don't have any problem with that.
Now, that doesn't mean that it's just like popping a candy into your mouth. It's more than that. You look at those paintings, wow. I mean, it's like delectation at another level. Elsewhere, he talks about learning that language, right? And if you can speak the language, you've got to learn something about it, and then you can speak it, and then you get more out of it. That isn't right. I mean, great art is instantly for everybody.
What do you think, guys? It's a little bit out of context, so let me try to clarify. So I was describing the use of elements and principles as the language of art. One must learn line, form, color, shape, pattern, movement, balance, all these aspects in order to make a work of art. And in my interview with Josh Neal, I went on to say that then the question becomes, what is it you want to say? Okay, you learn this language. Now, what do you say? So that kind of breaks away from the technical aspect into the aesthetic aspect and the conceptual aspect. So I really think it's a bit bold to say no, that doesn't play at all. I mean, actually, by saying that, there's no elements and principles to art, you're actually siding with the conceptualists then in that case, right? Because then it would be strictly concept. So, and no aesthetic value. And I mean, there's no rules of form. So, there even to convey some concept, there must be some rule of form to convey that concept. So I'm just kind of feeling out some contradictions here.
And there are people who know nothing about how to make paintings, but who are great appreciators of paintings and who really have a deep feeling for it. And then there are painters, who have a lot of technical skill and they really don't have much feeling for painting. So, and of course, if you do know, like if you know music theory, you can understand certain things and maybe appreciate certain things in a certain way. But that doesn't augment anybody's appreciation of music. It's not this cold technical problem.
I disagree. And this is something Josh and I both talked about. I think the problem here is that he's viewing it as a, quote, cold technical problem. This is the artist's mentality. And I can only say that because I'm an artist. And I'm not trying to be mean or whatever. I'm basically saying that experiencing art from within the creative process is quite different than looking at a canvas on a wall in a museum, believe me. So I think this is what's happening because I'm struggling to understand what he's saying.
The technique is always in the service of something, and that service of something is the art itself. And that the art itself, whether it's music or painting or whatever it is, it inevitably expresses something. But you're expressing it. What do I mean? The fundamental thing that's being expressed can't be expressed in any other way than in the art. I went through this with Charles Wright. This problem with Jonathan Peugeot. He also has this contemporary attitude that the meaning comes first. That it's all about the meaning. So he makes these diagrams of.
I really have to jump in here because that I've never said that for starters, and secondly, I've been in the process. I've done the process of art, which is truly, strictly, and totally intuitive. I get that, and that is an approach. The surrealists have this thing called automatic drawing, where you just let your hand wander on the paper with the pencil, and you don't judge it. You just watch it happen. You kind of just instinctively, mindlessly, almost go about it, and that's somehow more true art than something that is intended. And that spilled over into abstract expressionism. Not entirely, but, I'm getting into some historical and technical stuff. Let's continue.
Of these icons and so on. Well, the diagrams are sufficient. That's what it's all about. And then it's pretty. I mean, what's it pretty for? Well, I don't know. To draw people in so that they'll then be able to read the message. And then the message is what counts. And therefore, you're not, Byzantine art is well, I mean, there's really nifty, wonderful icons. But then there's a lot of awfully boring stuff. I mean, there's boring regular painting too because it gets illustrative. They're just trying to illustrate this and that. And so it becomes perfunctory. And the comic books can be that way too. It's a lot.
Okay. How do I say this? This is the approach of aesthetics from the feeling of, or from the approach that, how does it make me feel? Is it delectable? Is it aesthetic? Does it give me a rush? The antithesis of that mentality is the person who plots out, designs, and executes a work of art for the purpose of making somebody feel a specific feeling. So that approach, which I just said, is really more in the graphic design world, frankly, right? Because you plan, how do I sell this item, or how do I get people excited about, shopping at my store or whatever. So, but and also to the extent of like, okay, I have to paint this image of the crowning of King Louis the Fourth or Fifth, and okay, who were the people there? What were they dressed at? There's all these specific iconographies that people have to follow and in various forms. So that's a different kind of art, right? Not all art is just pure adrenaline rush aesthetics. They art has many, I don't know, purposes, meanings, forms. So again, this is where I'm coming from in terms of thinking he's approaching this strictly as an aesthetician.
An awful lot of perfunctory comic book art, where the things that are exciting are really just borrowed from other artists. But then there are, Jack Kirby, or any of the greats. I mean, they do something, just it's beyond. You could call it eye candy, but it's just this great thing, like the thing that Jack Kirby does. It's nourishing. It's wonderful. It's not just some pedestrian thing. It's art. It says something that's inexpressible.
Dramatic pause.
The categories have been blurred. No, in France, they no longer say painter or sculptor or anything. They say plasticien. People that deal with plastic arts.
I like that, by the way. I think that's pretty cool. I'm going to have to learn some French. There's always that thing of music is art and poetry is art and dance is art. I never said it wasn't. It's this weird thing that the public has this idea that when you say I do art, they go, "Oh, show me your paintings." Well, there's all kinds of arts, right? Moving on.
So blurring it down, and it's just art, and everybody's an artist. Okay, yes, there is art. Art is the different arts: painting, composing, dancing, literature, poetry. All these things. Okay, that composes the arts. And then you practice an art. You practice the art of poetry. And that it has its own thing.
By own thing, I guess that would be language, structure, and form, which are things that I was advocating for and talking about. So again, these are I don't know what to say. I mean, I feel as if he's kind of talking himself out of his own point here by constantly referencing like the structure and the language of these things.
And it's not. I mean, poetry. Then there are meanings in poetry, but there's something magical in poetry. And when you think, say, of Keats, okay, you think of this nostalgic thing, Ode to a Grecian Urn or whatever it is, but there's also just the special beauty that it has. Or
I do want to agree there. I think our artists all wish that other people could see the world the way we see the world, that we have this, I don't know what to call it. It's like, imagine having another nervous system, for example, that was just, super lit, and that, these aesthetic experiences are intensely rich for us. And we want so badly for the world to experience that. You might say it's spiritual. There's something about it. And you can even see that kind of frustration in his face of like, how the hell do I express this idea? You can't make other people be you. They cannot feel the world through your senses. So we're left with the measly act of creating art, because that's the best we can do, is to replicate our own joy and ecstasy.
Naturally, I can't think of the names of the poets I want to talk about. But each poet has its kind of, you could call it music, or it's mixed up with the meanings they're conveyed, but it's something more than that. It's not just an essay. It's not just all right, what meaning do I want to express? The greatness of the white race, or the specificity of the white race. Write an anthropological treatise, and then you can that's where you can talk about that.
Disagree. I mean, it's crazy because so much of Western art, whether it meant to or not, does that very thing he described, the greatness of the white race. Yeah, you can do an anthropological study of it, and actually anthropology is a fantastic doorway into the arts. And frankly, I'm borrowing a lot of that approach to teach other people about the arts. So tricky. We'll just keep going.
Okay. If you could make a painting that had such a meaning, that aspect of the painting would just be kitsch. It's like they did that. But would it necessarily be kitsch?
All right, kitsch. Oh God, tacky, too self-aware. Art that tries too hard to make you feel or think something. I don't know why he's writing social realism, Nazi commie on there. I'm not quite sure. I'm getting, maybe he's referring to the art of say these parties and that kind of like, the heroic family plowing the fields in Russia. Then all the communist Chinese art is has that certain aesthetic to it, or that meaning to it. Let's keep going.
Is there a painting that is just there to express the greatness of? I don't know if you can even do that. And there's Velasquez's Surrender at Breda. That expresses something that's way beyond that kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, the Venetian painters expressing the glory of Venice. Well, it is glorious. I mean, Venice was just glorious, but it's not like they're saying, "Oh, look at us." I mean, when Veronese paints those vast canvases that are the Last Supper, it's not like he's promoting Venice. I mean, you can see through those paintings, the glory that was Venice.
So this brings back the topic I brought up earlier about, you just have to make art about something rather than being the art itself per se, or being, artists are like the fountain through which art comes, and artists are people, and people have cultures. So, yes, there can be, I don't know. I think he's kind of maybe critiquing the kind of college level or even high school level mentality of, I'm going to make art and say, white people are the best, woohoo. And that's just so cringe. It's awful. And, maybe from his aesthetic standard, looking at, say, Nazi Germany paintings or Chinese communist paintings that are propaganda, he might look at that as cringe and not see any aesthetic to it or something. This guy's referring to great paintings of history, but maybe there was someone in that history, in that time, that looked at those paintings and thought, oh, this is propaganda, this is cringe. So it's all quite difficult to clarify, I guess.
But that's not what it's about. Or if you see, I don't know, these sea paintings showing all these vast armies, or showing these wars. And there's so much in them from the real artists. You see the tragedy of it, you see the glory of it, and you see the tragedy of it. People were so much broader in their understanding. It's like this, all these wars. So since I've been a kid, there's the Vietnam War and, the Korean War, the Vietnamese War, and then all these other wars in the Middle East. Well, before these wars, I mean, who knew that Saigon even existed? Well, now we know all about Saigon. With all these Vietnamese people living in America, and now we know. Whoever heard of Mosul? Whoever heard of Kirkuk? And now we know about that. And now we've been in contact with all these different people from these places. And there's bad ones and there's good ones, and it's so of course war is terrible and so on, but at the same time it brings people together. I don't want to advocate for war, but it's just how things are. Things have a good side and a bad side.
How does this relate to your point?
I'm not sure if this relates at all to the topic.
Well, I'll let you figure it out. Or should we call it quits here? A lot of great angsty shots here, though. I mean, let's put some music on this right here.
Donald Kent talks about what he calls the elements and the principles, and all these things, balance, harmony, all this kind of stuff. But for years, I would try to find out about composition, and this stuff would come up. They're the pigs being taken off to Auschwitz.
Very weird thing to say.
Poor little pigs.
Creepy and weird.
And I try to make sense of those things. I try to make use of them. They're just abstractions that mean next to nothing.
That's wrong. We have to stop. Come on. I mean, you're a painter. How can principles and elements mean next to nothing? How do you even put paint to canvas without that? Did you just wake up one day and magically be able to do that? That's you clearly have great, amazing skills, and your work is very deeply rooted in Western tradition. Awesome, but to completely deny the tools and path by which you got to where you are, I can't wrap my head around that. And that's why I keep grappling with this idea that maybe you're just a very hardcore aesthetician, that you're all about the aesthetics, or you're all about the experience of painting. I know a lot of painters are, a lot of artists are, that it's whether anyone was watching or not, whether they sold a painting or not, or any of that, whether they published or not, they would still need to produce art. But, earlier you were talking about elements and principles, and it's just, if you're going to say it's nothing, then I would say I would love to hear an argument for that.
I mean, there are certain theoretical things that you can get into, but it's not that. I mean, I try to talk about them in my how-to videos. It's a subtle matter, but Donald Kent or a guy like that. I mean, he's doing his best. He's trying to find. He's trying to find something to hold on to, and it's normal that those things should come up, but that's not what it is.
I would love to know what it is then, my man. I mean, if you see my work, you'll know that I know, quote, what it is in some sense, but I don't know what you mean by it. So I'm really, really excited to learn. The anticipation is great. So I would love to hear about that.
All right, enough of this maundering. Now I'll show.
All right, this is where we're going to cut. Let's just kind of run back real quick and look at one of his paintings. It's so beautiful. And it's obviously very Western. So, look at that. It's lovely. And so let's talk about elements and principles here. All right, principles of composition. We have contrast. Okay, we have light and dark. We have movement. There's this tendency for the picture seems to be leaning in this direction. All the trees are leaning in the direction that the bull is going. You have I would say rhythm, in that you have the repetition of these lines of the tree, even in the repetition of like folds in the fur and the muscles of the bull. Perhaps this cloth kind of mimics the trees, the foliage a bit. Maybe the flowing a little bit of these reeds and water, whatever it is. This is totally classical Western art. It's completely rich with the elements and principles of art. So I can't see how you can deny that. I mean, it's clearly an aesthetically rich piece. There's obviously story to it. There's obviously parable of some kind. I don't know what it is. I bet some of our mythologist friends could easily say, "Oh, that's such and such." So that I don't know really where to end this off on. I welcome critique. I engage it. I love it. Even if you're a mean person, spiteful, and you want to say bad words to me, I welcome that too, because I'm too old to care about that kind of thing. And I just love discussing art. And so go for it. Anybody who wants to get involved, please engage me. I'm deeply grateful to Paul, and I did thank him. We don't see eye to eye on everything. It's obviously not necessary, but I think it's exciting in the sense that, it opens up more questions. So I bid you adieu, and probably that was my French ending right there. Anyway, love you guys. You have a lovely day. You take care, and we'll see you on the internets. Cancel recording. No, I don't want to cancel the recording. Sorry for being a tech goofball here. Cancel. I am going to see you later.